The autumn wind carried a bitter chill as Penelope Summers clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly as the stagecoach pulled away, leaving her alone in the dusty street of Fort Benton, Montana. The year was 1878, and at 20 years old, Penelope found herself abandoned, pregnant, and utterly alone in a frontier town where she knew not a soul. Penelope watched the stagecoach disappear into the distance, carrying with it her last connection to her former life. Her parents' final words echoed in her mind. "You've brought shame upon this family. We'll not have a daughter who bears a child out of wedlock." Their faces had been cold, unrecognizable, as they'd put her on the stagecoach with nothing but a small valise of belongings and enough money for a fresh start far from their respected Boston home. The baby kicked, a reminder of the life growing inside her despite everything. Penelope swallowed hard against the tears threatening to spill. She would not break down here in the street. She straightened her spine and turned to face the frontier town that would be her new home, whether it welcomed her or not. Fort Benton bustled with activity despite the lateness of the season. River traders, trappers, and settlers moved about their business, paying little attention to the young woman standing alone by the stagecoach stop. Penelope took a deep breath and made her way toward what appeared to be a hotel, the Montana House, according to its weathered sign. The weight of her valise strained her arm, and the long journey had left her exhausted. As she struggled up the hotel steps, her foot caught on the uneven wooden planking. She pitched forward with a startled cry, her valise flying from her grasp. Strong hands caught her before she hit the boards, steadying her with gentle firmness. "Whoa there, careful now," came a deep voice, rich as honey over gravel. Penelope looked up into the face of her rescuer. He wore a worn Stetson pulled low over his brow, but she could see eyes the color of a summer sky beneath it. His face was tanned and weathered, with several days' worth of stubble covering a strong jaw. He wasn't a young man, but not old either, perhaps 30 or so. "Thank you," she managed, attempting to regain her composure. "You all right, madam?" he asked, concern evident in his voice as his gaze flicked briefly to her rounded belly. "Yes, thank you, I'm fine." Penelope straightened her shawl, embarrassed by her clumsiness. He retrieved her valise, holding it with ease in one hand. "You just arrived in town." She nodded, suddenly very aware of how alone she truly was. "I'm Jake Ortega," he said, tipping his hat. "Most folks call me Jake." "Penelope Summers," she replied, offering a small smile. "You have family meeting you, Miss Summers." His eyes scanned the empty street behind her. The simple question hit like a physical blow. Penelope felt her composure cracking. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have anyone." Something in Jake's expression softened. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her fine, if travel-worn, clothes and the wedding band conspicuously absent from her finger. "Well," he said finally, "seems to me you've had a long journey. Let me help you get settled at the hotel." Penelope wanted to refuse. To insist she could manage on her own wasn't that what she would have to do from now on. But exhaustion and hunger were taking their toll. She nodded gratefully. Jake carried her valise into the hotel lobby, speaking quietly to the clerk. Penelope caught fragments of their conversation. "Traveling alone. Needs a good meal. I'll cover it," before Jake returned to her side. "Mr. Reynolds here has a room available," Jake told her. "It's small but clean. The dining room will be serving supper in an hour." "Thank you, but I can pay for my own accommodations," Penelope insisted, reaching for her reticule. Jake held up a hand. "Consider it a welcome to Fort Benton. This town takes care of its own." "But I'm not," Penelope began. "You are now," he said simply. Before she could argue further, the hotel clerk appeared with a key. "Room 4, miss, top of the stairs on your right. Dining room's through there." He pointed to a doorway off the lobby. "Supper's at 6 sharp." Jake handed her the valise. "Miss Summers, I'd be honored if you join me for supper. After your journey, you might appreciate some company and local knowledge." Penelope hesitated. She'd been raised to be cautious around strange men, especially those who offered unsolicited assistance. But there was something in Jake Ortega's eyes, a steadiness, an honesty that calmed her usual wariness. "Thank you, Mr. Ortega. I would appreciate that." He tipped his hat again. 6 o'clock, then. Penelope's room was indeed small, but, as promised, clean and comfortable. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a ceramic pitcher and bowl, a small dresser, and a rocking chair by the window overlooking the main street. She unpacked her few belongings, 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a hairbrush, a small leather-bound journal, and a tiny silver music box, the only keepsake she'd brought from her former life. After washing away the dust of travel, Penelope changed into her second-best dress, a dark blue calico that somewhat disguised her condition, and attempted to tame her auburn hair into a respectable bun. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror seemed both familiar and strange, the same green eyes and freckled nose she'd always known, but now haunted by shadows and worry lines that hadn't been there 6 months ago. 6 months ago, when Thomas had sworn his love and promised to return and marry her before anyone knew of their indiscretion. 6 months ago, before the letter arrived informing her that Lieutenant Thomas Wellington had succumbed to fever at his military posting in the Arizona Territory. 6 months ago, before she'd had to tell her parents that their unmarried daughter was carrying a dead soldier's child, Penelope placed a protective hand over her belly. "It's just us now, little one," she whispered, "but we'll manage." At 6 o'clock, she made her way downstairs. The dining room was half filled with hotel guests and a few locals. Jake stood when she entered, pulling out a chair at a small table near the fireplace. "You're looking more rested, Miss Summers," he said as she sat down. "Thank you, and please call me Penelope." Jake signaled to a serving girl who brought over 2 plates heaped with venison stew, fresh bread, and stewed apples. "Best fare in town," Jake said, breaking off a chunk of bread. "Mrs. Landry, the cook, has been feeding hungry folks in Fort Benton for 15 years. Penelope took a bite of the stew, surprised at how ravenous she felt. "It's delicious." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Jake spoke again. "So, what brings you to Fort Benton, Penelope? It's not exactly on the way to anywhere." She set down her spoon, considering how much to reveal. "I needed a fresh start," she said carefully. "Somewhere far from Boston." Jake nodded, not pushing further. "Fort Benton's a good place for starting over. It's grown up some since the early days. Used to be just a fur trading post, then a military fort. Now we've got a proper town with businesses, a school, even a church." "What do you do here, Mr. Ortega?" "Jake, please." He took a sip of coffee. "I run a small cattle ranch about 5 miles outside of town. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Came out here after the war with nothing but my horse and saddle. Worked as a ranch hand till I saved enough to buy my own piece of land." "You fought in the war?" Penelope asked, curious about this man who'd shown her such unexpected kindness. A shadow crossed his face. "Yes, madam. Union cavalry." "Saw more than my share of fighting." Something in his tone told her not to probe further. "And now you're a rancher." "And now I'm a rancher," he agreed, his smile returning. "Got about 60 head of cattle, a few horses, and a dog that's more trouble than he's worth most days." As they continued their meal, Jake told her more about Fort Benton, about the Missouri River that had made the town an important port, about the surrounding ranchlands and farms, about the mix of people who called the area home. "There's work to be found here," he said, "if you're looking. The mercantile needs a clerk with good penmanship. The school might need help too, especially with more families settling in the valley." Penelope appreciated his attempt to help, but reality weighed heavy. "I doubt many would be eager to hire a woman in my condition." She glanced down at her swollen belly. Jake's gaze was steady, unembarrassed by her directness. "Folks here judge by what you do, not what happened before you arrived. Besides, this is the frontier. We can't afford to waste capable hands. I appreciate your optimism, but I'm not naive. I know what people think of women like me." "Then they'd be wrong," Jake said firmly. "And anyone who treats you poorly will answer to me." Penelope studied him, puzzled by his protective declaration. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Jake was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I know what it's like to be alone in a strange place. When I first came here after the war, I was lost. A local rancher named Hank Dutton took me under his wing, gave me work when others saw only a haunted soldier. I swore I'd pay that kindness forward when I could." The sincerity in his voice touched something in Penelope. "Well, I'm grateful for your kindness, but I don't expect you to take responsibility for me. I'll find my way." "I'm sure you will," Jake said with a smile. "But everyone needs a friend now and then." After supper, Jake walked Penelope back to the hotel lobby. "I'll be in town for a few more days," he told her. "I've got supplies to pick up and some business at the bank. If you'd like, I can introduce you around town tomorrow." Penelope hesitated, torn between her pride and practicality. "That would be helpful, thank you. Meet you here at 9. When she nodded, he tipped his hat. "Good night, Penelope Summers. Sleep well." Alone in her room, Penelope sat in the rocking chair by the window, watching the lights of the town flicker in the gathering darkness. Fort Benton was nothing like Boston, rougher, simpler, yet somehow more honest. Perhaps here, far from the rigid social strictures of the East, she could forge a life for herself and her child. The baby kicked again, more insistently this time. "Yes, I know," she murmured, rocking gently. "We've found a place to rest, at least for now, and perhaps we've found a friend." She thought of Jake Ortega's kind eyes and steady presence. He was unlike any man she'd met in Boston society, direct, unpolished, but with an integrity that couldn't be feigned. A man who had fought in a war, built a ranch from nothing, and still paused to help a stranger. Morning brought a crystalline sky and frost patterns on the window glass. Penelope dressed carefully in her best remaining dress of forest green wool that her mother had commissioned just before everything changed. The thought of her mother brought a fresh wave of pain. How could the woman who had kissed her childhood scrapes, who had taught her to read and sew and play the pianoforte, have turned away from her so completely? Penelope pushed the thoughts aside. Dwelling on what was lost would not help her build what must come next. At 9 o'clock she found Jake waiting in the lobby, his tall frame easy to spot among the other hotel guests. He wore clean denims, a fresh shirt and a leather vest, his dark hair still damp from washing. "Good morning," he greeted her, something warm in his eyes as he took in her appearance. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Penelope admitted. "Good. I thought we'd start at the mercantile. Mr. Wilson's been complaining about needing help since his daughter got married and moved to Helena." The air outside was brisk, but the sun promised warmth later. Fort Benton by daylight revealed itself as a town of contrasts, rough-hewn buildings alongside more substantial brick structures, dusty streets leading down to the river where steamboats were moored. "The river's getting lower," Jake commented as they walked. "Last steamboats of the season will be heading downstream soon before winter sets in." How isolated does the town become in winter? Penelope asked. Pretty isolated, especially if the snow's heavy. The stage still runs when the roads are passable, but there can be weeks when the only way in or out is by horse or sled. Most folks stock up on supplies in the fall. The Mercantile occupied a large corner building with a covered boardwalk out front. Inside, shelves reached to the ceiling, stocked with everything from tools to fabric, foodstuffs to ammunition. A thin man with spectacles and an impressive mustache was helping a customer at the counter. "Morning, Mr. Wilson," Jake called. The shopkeeper looked up. "Jake Ortega." "Got your order ready in the back." "And who might this be?" "Penelope Summers, just arrived from Boston." "Penelope, this is Howard Wilson, proprietor of the finest and only Mercantile in Fort Benton." "Miss Summers," Mr. Wilson said, nodding politely. If he noticed her condition, he gave no sign of it. "Welcome to our little town." "Thank you," Penelope replied. "You have an impressive establishment." "Jake mentioned you might be looking for a clerk," Mr. Wilson said, adjusting his spectacles. "I don't suppose you have experience with bookkeeping." "I do, actually," Penelope said, surprised at the direct inquiry. "I assisted my father with his accounts for several years." Mr. Wilson's eyebrows rose. "Did you now? And can you write a fair hand? My eyes aren't what they used to be." "I was complimented on my penmanship by my tutors." The shopkeeper studied her appraisingly. "Could you start tomorrow? 6 days a week, 8 till 5 with Sundays off. Pays $15 a week, plus you can have the room above the shop rent-free if you'd like." "My daughter used to live there before she married." Penelope blinked, stunned by the offer. Yes, that would be most agreeable." She'd expected to face resistance, not an immediate job offer. "Good, good." Mr. Wilson nodded decisively. "Come by tomorrow morning and we'll get you settled." He turned to Jake. "Now, about your order." As the men discussed supplies, Penelope wandered through the store, marveling at her stroke of good fortune. A job and lodging in one stroke. It wouldn't be much, but it would be enough to support herself and her child. At least until the baby came, then she would have to find another solution. After the Mercantile, Jake showed her around the rest of the town, the small schoolhouse where children of various ages learned together under the tutelage of a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Hawkins, the church that served multiple denominations on a rotating schedule, the doctor's house where a hand-painted sign announced Samuel Jenkins, M.D., surgeon and physician. "Dr. Jenkins is getting on in years," Jake explained, "but he's a good doctor. Served as an army surgeon during the war. You should meet him, considering." Penelope nodded, one hand resting on her belly. "Yes, that would be prudent." Dr. Jenkins proved to be a grandfatherly man with a shock of white hair and surprisingly gentle hands. He listened attentively as Penelope explained her condition and estimated time of confinement. "December, you say?" The doctor nodded. "First child?" "Yes." "Well, you seem healthy enough, though a bit thin. Have you been eating properly?" Penelope thought of the meager meals on the stagecoach and before that, the loss of appetite that had accompanied her grief and shame. "Not as well as I should have, perhaps," the doctor harumphed. "You'll need to do better. That baby needs nourishment." He wrote something on a piece of paper. "This is a tonic that will help. Mr. Wilson carries the ingredients at his store." As they left the doctor's office, Jake asked, "Would you like to see more of the town, or are you getting tired?" Penelope realized with surprise that she was indeed weary. "Perhaps we could continue tomorrow." "I should rest before I begin work." "Of course." Jake offered his arm. "Let me walk you back to the hotel." On their way, they passed a woman pushing a baby carriage. The young mother smiled at Penelope, then glanced curiously at Jake. "Mrs. Cooper," Jake greeted her. "This is Miss Summers, newly arrived from Boston." "Welcome to Fort Benton," Mrs. Cooper said warmly. "Is this your first child?" The simple, friendly question, asked without judgment, nearly brought tears to Penelope's eyes. "Yes, it is." "Well, if you need anything, advice, baby things, just someone to talk to, please come by. We're just down Cedar Street, the blue house with the picket fence." "Thank you," Penelope said, touched by the unexpected kindness. "I may take you up on that offer." As they continued walking, Penelope said quietly, "Everyone has been so accepting." Jake's expression was understanding. "Like I said, this is the frontier. Most folks here have their own stories, their own reasons for leaving wherever they came from. We've all got pasts." Back at the hotel, Jake hesitated before saying goodbye. "If you're not too tired this evening, there's a social at the church. Nothing fancy, just music and refreshments. Might be a good way to meet more of the townspeople." Penelope considered. The idea of facing a crowd of strangers was daunting, but she knew she would need to integrate into the community if she was to make a life here. "What time does it begin?" "7 o'clock. I could escort you if you'd like." The offer was tempting, more tempting than it should have been. Jake Ortega was becoming dangerously easy to rely on. "Thank you, but I think I should rest tonight. Tomorrow is my first day of work, after all." Was that disappointment in his eyes? "Of course. Good luck tomorrow, though I doubt you'll need it. Howard Wilson may look stern, but he's fair." "You'll do fine." After Jake left, Penelope rested on her bed, one hand absently stroking her belly as she contemplated the whirlwind changes of the past 2 days. From utter abandonment to having a job and the beginnings of a social connection, it was almost too much to comprehend. "We might be all right here, little one," she whispered. "We just might be all right." The next morning, Penelope rose early, dressed in her plainest dress and braided her hair in a simple style. After a quick breakfast in the hotel dining room, she made her way to the Mercantile, determined to prove herself capable and reliable. Mr. Wilson was already there, arranging goods on shelves. "Ah, Miss Summers. Right on time. Let me show you the accounts." The ledger system was straightforward enough, though somewhat disorganized. Penelope quickly grasped the rhythm of the store, busier in the mornings when ranchers and farmers came to town for supplies, quieter in the afternoons. Mr. Wilson handled most customer interactions while Penelope kept the books, wrote correspondence, and organized the storeroom. By mid-afternoon, she had already implemented small improvements to the filing system that Mr. Wilson grudgingly admitted were sensible enough. The room above the shop proved to be larger and more comfortable than her hotel room, a combined sitting room and bedroom with its own small kitchen area, and a separate water closet. It was sparsely furnished but clean, with windows that looked out over the main street and, in the distance, the winding Missouri River. "My Martha fixed it up for our Eliza," Mr. Wilson explained as he showed her the space. "Said a young woman needs her own proper place. You can move in whenever you're ready. There's a private entrance at the back so you don't have to go through the store." "It's lovely," Penelope said sincerely. "Thank you." "Just doing what's right," the shopkeeper said gruffly. "Town needs young people to grow. Can't have them leaving because there's no place for them." Jake stopped by the store late in the afternoon, his arms laden with supplies that Mr. Wilson had set aside for him. "How's your first day?" he asked Penelope while Wilson was helping another customer. "Busy, but good. Mr. Wilson has offered me the room upstairs." "That's wonderful." Jake seemed genuinely pleased. "It's a nice place and you'll be right in town." "I'll be moving in tomorrow. The hotel has been comfortable, but this will be more permanent." Jake nodded. "Listen, I'll be heading back to my ranch day after tomorrow. Got cattle to tend to. But I was wondering if you might like to see a bit more of the area before I go. There's a nice spot by the river, not far from town. Good place for a picnic lunch if you're interested." The invitation brought a flutter of something Penelope hadn't felt in a long time: anticipation, perhaps even pleasure. "I'd like that very much. Mr. Wilson has given me Sunday off." "Sunday it is, then." Jake tipped his hat. "I'll come by around noon." After he left, Mr. Wilson emerged from the storeroom. "Jake Ortega's a good man," he said casually. "One of the best in these parts." Penelope wasn't sure how to respond, so she simply nodded and returned to the ledger. That evening, she moved her few belongings from the hotel to her new quarters above the Mercantile. The space felt empty, but it was hers, the first place that had truly been hers alone. She arranged her dresses in the small wardrobe, placed her journal and the silver music box on the bedside table, and stood in the center of the room, taking it all in. "Our new home," she said to her unborn child. "At least for now." The next few days fell into a pattern. Penelope would rise early, prepare a simple breakfast, and be downstairs when Mr. Wilson opened the store. The work was straightforward, if sometimes tedious, but she found satisfaction in bringing order to the chaotic bookkeeping system and in the small interactions with customers who gradually became familiar faces. News of the new Eastern lady working at Wilson's spread quickly through the small town. Some women came to the store specifically to meet her, offering welcomes and practical advice about the approaching winter. A few brought small gifts: homemade preserves, a knitted baby blanket, a sachet of dried herbs to help with sleep in your condition. Penelope was overwhelmed by the generosity. When she tried to thank Mrs. Cooper, who had brought the blanket, the young mother simply shrugged. "That's how we do things here. My neighbor helped me when Jamie was born, and you'll help someone else when the time comes. That's how we all survive out here." Sunday dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn day. Penelope dressed in her green wool dress and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Her pregnancy was undeniable now, but she no longer felt the need to hide it or apologize for it. The people of Fort Benton had accepted her as she was, which was more than her own family had done. Jake arrived precisely at noon, driving a wagon rather than riding horseback as he usually did. "Thought this would be more comfortable for you," he explained, helping her up to the seat. "It's not far, but no sense in you walking if you don't have to." He had packed a picnic basket with bread, cheese, cold chicken, and apples, along with a jug of fresh cider. "Mrs. Landry at the hotel helped with the food," he admitted. "I'm not much of a cook." The spot Jake had chosen was indeed beautiful, a grassy bank overlooking a bend in the Missouri River, sheltered by cottonwood trees whose leaves had turned golden in the autumn light. He spread a blanket on the ground and helped Penelope settle comfortably before unpacking the food. "This is lovely," Penelope said, looking out at the river. "I can see why you chose this place." "Used to come here when I first arrived," Jake said, pouring cider into 2 tin cups. "When the memories got too loud, I'd sit by the river and just listen to the water, something soothing about it." "The war memories?" Penelope asked gently. Jake nodded, his gaze distant. "Saw too many men die, young men, most of them, boys really, and for what? A country still broken in so many ways." "Is that why you came west? To escape those memories?" "Partly," Jake admitted. "Partly because there wasn't much left for me back home in Pennsylvania. My parents died when I was young. My aunt raised me, but she passed during the war. No siblings, no real ties. The West seemed like a place where a man could start fresh, build something of his own." He looked at her curiously. "What about you? You mentioned Boston, but not much else." Penelope took a deep breath. She hadn't spoken of her past to anyone in Fort Benton, but Jake deserved her honesty after all his kindness. "My father is a banker in Boston. My family was, well respected in society. I was raised to be a proper lady, to make a suitable marriage, to continue the social traditions my mother valued so highly. The words tasted bitter now. I met Thomas, the baby's father, at a military ball last winter. He was handsome, charming, recently commissioned as a lieutenant. We fell in love, or I thought we did. Penelope paused, gathering her courage. He promised to marry me when he returned from his posting in Arizona Territory. We anticipated our vows. When I realized I was with child, I wrote to him immediately. His reply was that he would request leave to return and make things right. But the next letter I received was from his commanding officer, informing me that Lieutenant Wellington had succumbed to fever. Jake's expression was somber. "I'm sorry, Penelope." When I could hide my condition no longer, I had to tell my parents. I thought they would be disappointed but supportive. Instead, Penelope swallowed hard. Instead, they told me I had brought shame upon the family name. My father arranged for me to travel west, provided money for a fresh start, and made it clear that I was no longer welcome in their home. My mother couldn't even look at me as I left. To her surprise, Jake reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Their loss," he said simply. "Any family would be fortunate to have a daughter with your courage." Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. "I don't feel courageous. Most days I feel terrified. I know nothing about raising a child, especially alone." "You won't be alone," Jake said, his voice firm. "You have friends here now. People who care." The conviction in his voice made her look up, meeting his gaze. There was something in his blue eyes that made her heart beat faster, a warmth, an admiration that she hadn't expected to see directed at her ever again. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything you've done since I arrived." Jake smiled, a gentle expression that transformed his weathered face. "You're doing all the hard work, Penelope. I'm just pointing out the path now and then." They finished their meal in companionable conversation. Jake telling stories of his early days as a rancher, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned, the satisfaction of seeing his small herd grow year by year. "I'd like you to see my ranch sometime," he said as they packed up the remains of the picnic. "It's nothing fancy, but it's home." "I'd like that," Penelope replied, surprised to realize how much she meant it. As Jake helped her back into the wagon, his hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. The touch sent a warmth through Penelope that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. On the drive back to town, Jake said, "I'll be gone for a couple of weeks. Got to move the herd to winter pasture and make sure the ranch is prepared for the cold weather. But I'll be back in town regularly for supplies." Penelope nodded, trying not to show her disappointment at the thought of not seeing him for so long. "Of course, you have your responsibilities." "I'll check in on you when I return," he promised. "Make sure you're getting along all right." Back at the mercantile, Jake helped her down from the wagon, his strong hands gentle at her waist. "Thank you for coming today," he said. "It's been a pleasure." "The pleasure was mine," Penelope replied, meaning it sincerely. As she watched him drive away, Penelope felt a curious mix of emotions: gratitude for his friendship, sadness at his departure, and something else, something warm and unexpected that she wasn't quite ready to name. The weeks that followed were busy ones for Penelope. Mr. Wilson, impressed with her organizational skills, gave her more responsibilities in the store. She learned the inventory system, began helping customers directly, and even made suggestions for new products that might appeal to the town's growing population of women and children. Her quarters above the shop became more homelike as she acquired a few modest furnishings, a comfortable rocking chair from Mrs. Cooper, whose husband was a carpenter. Curtains sewn from fabric Mr. Wilson let her have at cost. A small rag rug made by one of the local women. Her pregnancy advanced, the baby growing more active. Dr. Jenkins pronounced her healthy at her monthly checkup, though he continued to admonish her to eat more and rest frequently. Baby's positioned well, he told her in early November. Shouldn't be too difficult to birth, though first ones are never easy. When the time comes, send for me immediately. Penelope tried not to dwell on the approaching birth, focusing instead on preparing as best she could. She sewed simple baby garments in the evenings, grateful for the skills her mother had insisted she learn. The women of the town continued their kindnesses, bringing baby items and practical advice. "You'll stay with us after the birth," Mrs. Cooper declared one afternoon, brooking no argument. "At least for the first week. You can't manage alone with a newborn, not at first." "I couldn't impose," Penelope began. "Nonsense," Mrs. Cooper interrupted. "My Jamie is walking now, sleeping through the night. I have time to help and my husband won't mind. It's decided." True to his word, Jake returned to town after 2 weeks. Penelope was helping a customer when the bell above the shop door jingled and he walked in, bringing with him the scent of open air and horsehair. Her heart gave a ridiculous flutter at the sight of him, his cheeks ruddy from the cold, his smile warm as he caught sight of her. "Mr. Ortega," she greeted him formally, aware of the customer's curious glance between them. "Miss Summers," he replied, his eyes twinkling at the formality. "Mr. Wilson around, in the storeroom. I'll fetch him for you." Later, when the customer had left and Mr. Wilson was busy with the ledger, Jake approached the counter where Penelope was arranging a display of ribbons. "You look well," he said quietly. "The town life seems to agree with you." "I've been kept busy," she replied. "Mr. Wilson is teaching me the business from top to bottom." "Good man, Wilson," Jake nodded approvingly. "And how are you feeling?" His gaze dropped briefly to her belly, now prominently rounded beneath her dress. "Very well, thank you, doctor. Jenkins says the baby and I are both healthy." Jake's relief was evident. "Good, that's good. I was wondering. If you're not too busy, could I call on you this evening? There's something I'd like to discuss." Curiosity piqued, Penelope nodded. "I'd be pleased to receive you, say 7 o'clock. I have a private entrance at the back of the building." That evening, Penelope found herself fussing with her appearance more than usual. She changed into her blue dress, arranged her hair in a softer style than she wore for work, and even pinched her cheeks to bring some color to them. "This is foolishness," she muttered to herself. "He's simply being kind, checking on a newcomer to town." But her heart knew better, knew that Jake Ortega had become more than a kind stranger or even a friend. In the weeks since her arrival, he had shown her nothing but respect and consideration, had helped her find her place in Fort Benton without making her feel indebted or incapable. And she had begun to care for him in return, to admire his quiet strength, his integrity, the gentle way he interacted with everyone from the elderly to small children. She'd noticed how the townspeople respected him, how even the rough-looking trappers and river men nodded to him with deference. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Penelope smoothed her dress over her belly and went to answer it. Jake stood on the small landing, hat in hand, looking somewhat nervous. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His dark hair was neatly combed, his shirt crisp, his boots polished. "Please come in," Penelope said, stepping back to allow him entry. Jake ducked his head slightly as he entered, his tall frame making the modest room seem smaller. He glanced around, taking in the touches Penelope had added to make the space her own. "You've made it homey," he commented. "Suits you. Thank you. Would you like some tea? It's only just boiled." "That would be nice, thank you." Penelope busied herself with the teapot and cups, giving Jake time to settle into the chair she indicated. When she brought the tea tray over, he rose to take it from her, setting it carefully on the small table. "You mentioned there was something you wished to discuss." Penelope prompted as she poured the tea. Jake accepted his cup, turning it in his hands before meeting her gaze. Yes, well, I've been thinking. About you, about your situation, about the baby coming soon. Penelope tensed slightly. Was this where his kindness would end? Now that he'd seen her settled, perhaps he felt his obligation fulfilled. I know you've made a place for yourself here, Jake continued. Wilson values your work, and the townspeople have taken to you. But winter's coming, and a baby needs more than a room above a store, no matter how nice you've made it. I'm aware of the challenges, Penelope said, a defensive note creeping into her voice. Mrs. Cooper has offered to help after the birth, and I've been setting aside money from my wages. We'll manage. Jake set his tea down and leaned forward, his expression earnest. I know you will. You're the most capable woman I've ever met, Penelope, but what I'm trying to say badly, it seems, is that you don't have to manage alone. He took a deep breath. I have a ranch. It's modest, but it's paid for. The house is small but solid, 2 bedrooms, a good kitchen, a porch that catches the morning sun. There's land for growing things, clean air, space for a child to run and play. Penelope's heart began to race. Jake, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying that I care for you, Penelope. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your courage and determination, I've come to admire you greatly, more than admire. He reached across and took her hand. I know it's sudden. I know you're still grieving for what might have been with your lieutenant. But I want you to know that if you would consider it, I would be honored to offer you my name, my home, my protection. Penelope stared at him, stunned by the proposal. You want to marry me? A woman carrying another man's child. I want to marry you, Jake said firmly. The child would be mine in every way that matters. I would raise it as my own with love and care. But why? Penelope whispered. You could have any unmarried woman in the territory. Why choose someone with my complications? Jake's eyes were steady on hers. Because none of them are you. Because from the moment I saw you standing alone by that stagecoach, something in me recognized something in you. We're both people who have lost our original families, who have had to make our own way. I think we could make a good life together, Penelope. A real family. Tears filled Penelope's eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to answer now, Jake assured her, squeezing her hand gently. Think about it. Talk to Mrs. Cooper or the other women if you want a woman's perspective. I'm not offering out of pity, Penelope. I'm offering because I believe we could be happy together. He released her hand and stood. I should go, let you rest. I'll be in town for a few more days before I need to return to the ranch. At the door, he paused. Whatever you decide, you're not alone anymore, Penelope. Remember that. After Jake left, Penelope sat in her rocking chair for a long time, her hands resting on her belly where the baby kicked and shifted. Marriage, a home of her own, a father for her child. The prospect was both tempting and terrifying. She had never expected to marry for practicality rather than love. But wasn't that what many marriages were, especially out here on the frontier? Practical partnerships between people who respected each other and could build a life together. But there was more to Jake's offer than mere practicality. He had spoken of caring for her, of admiration that went beyond friendship. And hadn't she begun to feel the same? When she thought of Jake, his steady presence, his kind eyes, the way he treated everyone with equal respect, wasn't there a warmth in her heart that hadn't been there before? It wasn't the heady infatuation she'd felt for Thomas, but perhaps that was a good thing. That passion had burned bright but had ultimately led to heartbreak and abandonment. What Jake offered seemed more substantial, more enduring. The next day, during a quiet moment at the store, Penelope found herself confiding in Mr. Wilson. Jake Ortega has asked me to marry him, she said, watching the older man carefully for his reaction. Wilson barely looked up from the inventory list. About time. Been obvious to everyone in town how he feels about you. Penelope blinked in surprise. Has it? Man doesn't ride into town twice as often as usual just to check the price of grain, Wilson said dryly. And he doesn't look at a woman the way he looks at you unless he's serious. What should I do? I barely know him. Wilson set down his pencil and regarded her over his spectacles. Known him 5 years. Watched him build that ranch from nothing. He's honest, hardworking, treats his animals well, pays his debts on time. Never seen him drunk or cruel, more than I can say for most men. It was perhaps the longest speech Penelope had heard from her employer. You think I should accept? Think you should decide what you want, Wilson replied. But if it's security you're after, you won't find better. If it's kindness you need, Jake's got plenty. If it's love. The shopkeeper shrugged. That often grows with time when there's respect to nurture it. That evening, Penelope sought out Mrs. Cooper, who welcomed her with a cup of hot chocolate and an attentive ear. Jake Ortega is one of the good ones, Mrs. Cooper said when Penelope explained the situation. My William says there's not a man in the county more respected. And I've seen how he looks at you like you're something precious he's afraid might break. But is that enough reason to marry? Penelope asked. Shouldn't there be love? Mrs. Cooper smiled softly. There are many kinds of love, Penelope. The kind that blazes up like wildfire is thrilling, but it can burn itself out just as fast. The kind that starts with respect and kindness and grows deeper with time, that's the kind that lasts through the hard winters and the dry summers, through sickness and all the trials that life brings. She reached over and patted Penelope's hand. I think Jake Ortega already loves you in his way. The question is, could you come to love him? Penelope considered the question carefully. I believe I could. I already care for him more than I expected to. Then maybe that's your answer. 2 days later, Penelope asked Jake to walk with her by the river after the store closed. The afternoon was chilly but bright, the river reflecting the blue of the sky. I've thought about your proposal, she began when they reached the riverbank. I've spoken to people who know you, considered what kind of life we might build together. Jake waited silently, his expression carefully controlled. Before I give you my answer, I need to ask something, Penelope continued. You say you care for me now, but what happens when the baby comes? When it cries in the night, when it grows to look like a man you never knew, will you resent it, resent me? Jake considered her question seriously. I can't promise I'll never feel moments of complication. I'm human, Penelope. But I know this, I already care for that child because it's part of you. And I believe that once it's born, once I hold it in my arms, I'll love it for itself, not just as an extension of you. He took her hands in his. My father died when I was young, but I remember him saying that blood doesn't make a family, love does. That child will be mine in every way that matters if you'll let me be its father. Tears filled Penelope's eyes at the sincerity in his voice. Then yes, Jake Ortega, I will marry you. I will share your home and raise this child with you, and perhaps, in time, give it brothers and sisters. Joy transformed Jake's face. He pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of her belly between them. You've made me the happiest man in Montana Territory, Penelope Summers. With careful tenderness, he lowered his head and kissed her, a sweet, chaste kiss that nevertheless held the promise of deeper passion to come. Penelope found herself responding, her heart racing at this new intimacy between them. When they parted, Jake rested his forehead against hers. When would you like to be married? We can wait until after the baby comes if you prefer, Penelope considered. I'd rather be married before the birth if possible. I want the child to have your name from the beginning. Then we'll be married as soon as it can be arranged. The circuit preacher is due in town next week. Would that be too soon? No, Penelope smiled. That would be perfect. News of their engagement spread quickly through Fort Benton. Mr. Wilson gruffly offered to host a small reception in the store after the ceremony. Mrs. Cooper and several other women immediately began planning refreshments. Even Dr. Jenkins offered his congratulations, adding with a wink that marrying before the birth was a sensible precaution, given the baby's likely early arrival. The week passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Penelope used some of her savings to purchase fabric for a new dress, a dove gray wool, that Mrs. Cooper helped her fashion into a simple but elegant gown that accommodated her advanced pregnancy while still looking festive. Jake rode out to his ranch to prepare it for his new bride, returning the day before the wedding with a wagon containing a rocking chair he had commissioned from Mrs. Cooper's husband as a wedding gift. For nursing the baby, he explained, somewhat bashfully, and for sitting on the porch in the evenings. The gesture brought tears to Penelope's eyes. It's beautiful, Jake, thank you. The wedding took place on a crisp November morning in the small church. The circuit preacher, a jovial man named Reverend Thornton, performed the ceremony with warm efficiency. Nearly the entire town turned out to witness the union, the small church filled to capacity. Penelope wore her new gray dress with a spray of dried autumn flowers pinned to her bodice. Jake looked handsome and somewhat nervous in his best clothes, his dark hair slicked down, his face freshly shaven. The vows were simple but heartfelt. When Jake promised to love, honor, and cherish Penelope and the child she carries, a murmur of approval rippled through the congregation. When Penelope promised the same, her voice was steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Thornton declared. Mr. Ortega, you may kiss your bride. Jake's kiss was gentle but possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause. The reception at Wilson's Mercantile was a joyous affair. The townspeople had contributed food and drink, and someone produced a fiddle for dancing. Jake stayed close to Penelope throughout, introducing her as my wife with unmistakable pride. Late in the afternoon, as the celebration continued, Jake leaned down to whisper in Penelope's ear, "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Ortega?" The new name sent a thrill through Penelope. She nodded, suddenly eager to begin their life together. They said their goodbyes, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Mr. Wilson surprised Penelope with a month's wages as a wedding gift. "Consider it maternity leave," he said gruffly. "Your position will be waiting when you're ready to return." Jake helped Penelope into the wagon he had prepared for their journey. The bed was filled with her belongings, including the rocking chair and several wedding gifts from the townspeople. He had lined the seat with blankets for her comfort during the 5-mile journey to the ranch. As they left Fort Benton behind, Penelope looked back at the town that had welcomed her when she needed it most. "I never expected to find such kindness among strangers," she said softly. Jake covered her hand with his own. "That's the way of the frontier. People help each other because out here, that's how we all survive. And now you're part of it, part of us." The journey to the ranch took a little over an hour, the wagon moving carefully over the rutted trail. Jake pointed out landmarks along the way, a stand of cottonwoods where deer often gathered, a creek that ran year-round even in the driest summers, a distant ridge where he'd once tracked a mountain lion. As they crested a small rise, Jake reined in the horses. "There it is. Home." Penelope looked where he indicated. The ranch spread out before them in the late afternoon light, a modest but well-built log house with a covered porch, a large barn, corrals for horses and cattle, all nestled in a small valley with hills rising behind and a creek winding through. It wasn't grand, but it was solid and well-tended, the work of a man who took pride in what he had built with his own hands. Penelope could imagine children playing in the yard, gardens growing beside the house, life unfolding season by season in this peaceful place. "It's lovely, Jake," she said sincerely. "Truly lovely." Relief and pleasure crossed his face. "It's not what you were used to in Boston, it's better," Penelope interrupted. "It's real. It's home." As they approached the house, a large dog came bounding out, barking enthusiastically. "That's Rusty," Jake said with a chuckle. "More energy than sense, but loyal to a fault." The dog circled the wagon, tail wagging furiously as Jake brought it to a stop before the house. He hopped down and came around to help Penelope descend, the dog dancing around them both. "Rusty, meet Penelope. She's your new mistress, so mind your manners." The dog seemed to understand, calming somewhat as he approached Penelope, tail still wagging but more controlled now. She extended her hand for him to sniff, then scratched behind his ears. "Hello, Rusty." "I hope we'll be great friends." Jake watched them with a smile. He already approves, that's a good sign. Standing before the house, Jake suddenly seemed uncertain. "I should show you around, but first." He hesitated, then in a swift movement gathered Penelope into his arms. "Jake." "What are you doing?" she gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his neck. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," he replied. "It's tradition." "But in my condition, I've carried newborn calves heavier than you," he assured her, mounting the steps to the porch with ease. At the door, he paused. "Welcome home, Penelope Ortega." Inside, the house was simple but comfortable, a main room with a large stone fireplace, a solid wooden table and chairs, a couple of armchairs, bookshelves filled with more volumes than Penelope had expected. The kitchen occupied one end of the main room with a large cook stove, a pump for water, and sturdy cupboards. Jake set Penelope down gently and showed her the rest of the house, the two bedrooms, one clearly prepared for the coming baby with a hand-crafted cradle in one corner, the pantry stocked with preserves and staples, the small washroom with a tin bath. "I hope it will do," he said, watching her face for reaction. "We can change whatever doesn't suit you." Penelope turned to him, her heart full. "It's perfect, Jake, better than I ever dared hope for." Relief flooded his features. "I want you to be happy here, Penelope. I want this to be a real home for you and the baby." "It already is," she assured him, taking his hand, "because you're here." The days that followed established a rhythm to their new life together. Jake showed Penelope around the ranch, introduced her to the horses and cattle, taught her the basics of ranch operations. She took charge of the house, organizing things to her liking, planning meals, making the space truly their own. Their nights were a gentle discovery of each other. Jake was considerate of her condition, never pushing for more intimacy than Penelope was comfortable with. They shared the marriage bed, often simply holding each other through the night, Jake's hand resting protectively over her swollen belly where their child, for so Penelope, had begun to think of it, kicked and turned. Sometimes they would talk late into the night, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future. Jake spoke of his dreams for the ranch, expanding the herd, perhaps breeding horses, building a larger house someday. Penelope shared her own hopes, perhaps teaching their children and others nearby, starting a small library for the isolated community, creating a garden with vegetables and flowers. "You've made this place feel like a real home," Jake told her one evening as they sat before the fire, Penelope knitting a tiny cap for the baby. "I never realized how empty it was until you filled it." Penelope smiled, touched by his words. "And you've given me a home when I thought I'd lost mine forever. It seems we were meant to find each other." The baby was due in mid-December, But as Dr. Jenkins had warned, first babies often followed their own timetables. As November drew to a close, Penelope's discomfort increased. Jake hovered anxiously, ready to ride for the doctor at the first sign of labor. "You're worse than a nervous mare with her first foal," Penelope teased him one morning as she waddled about the kitchen. "Can't help it," Jake admitted, watching her with concern. "I've never been responsible for something so important before." The labor began on the first day of December, with a backache that gradually intensified into unmistakable contractions. Jake helped Penelope to bed, his face pale with worry, then saddled his fastest horse to fetch Dr. Jenkins from town. "I'll be back as soon as humanly possible," he promised, kissing her forehead. "Just hold on, both of you." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and determination for Penelope. Mrs. Cooper arrived shortly after Jake left, having been alerted by a ranch hand Jake had sent to fetch her on his way to town. "You're doing fine, Penelope," Mrs. Cooper assured her, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "Just breathe through it. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." Dr. Jenkins arrived with Jake just as the labor entered its most intense phase. The doctor examined Penelope, his manner calm and professional. "Everything's progressing normally," he announced. "It won't be long now." Jake refused to leave Penelope's side, holding her hand through each contraction, murmuring encouragement, his face a mixture of awe and terror as he witnessed the power of birth. Just after midnight, with a final, tremendous effort from Penelope, their child entered the world, a robust boy with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced his arrival with impressive volume. "A son," Dr. Jenkins declared, placing the squalling infant on Penelope's chest. "A fine, healthy son." Penelope gazed down at the tiny life she had carried for so long, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Jake stared at the baby in wonder, his own eyes suspiciously bright. When he finally found his voice, it was rough with emotion. "He's perfect, Penelope. Absolutely perfect." Dr. Jenkins completed his ministrations efficiently, declaring both mother and child to be doing well. "What will you name him?" he asked as he packed his bag to leave. Penelope looked at Jake questioningly. They had discussed names but made no final decision. "William," Jake said decisively. "William Thomas Ortega, if that suits you, Penelope." The inclusion of Thomas's name was an unexpected kindness that brought fresh tears to Penelope's eyes. "It's perfect," she agreed. "William Thomas Ortega." After Dr. Jenkins and Mrs. Cooper had gone, promising to return the next day to check on mother and child, Jake sat on the edge of the bed, gazing at his wife and new son. "Thank you," he said softly, reaching out to stroke the baby's downy head. "For giving me a family. I never thought I'd have this." "We're the ones who should be thanking you," Penelope replied, leaning into his touch. "You took us in when we had nowhere else to go. You gave us a home, a name, a future." Jake bent to kiss her gently. "And you've given me a reason for everything I've built, everything I am." As they sat together in the quiet of their bedroom, the new family complete and whole, Penelope thought back to that moment months ago when she had stood alone in Fort Benton, abandoned and afraid. She had not known then that her darkest moment would lead her to a home filled with love, to a husband who cherished her, to a child who would grow up knowing only acceptance and belonging. "You're not alone anymore," Jake had told her that first day. And he had kept his promise, giving her not just company in her solitude, but a love and a life beyond anything she could have imagined. Outside, the Montana winter settled over the land, snow beginning to drift down in the darkness. Inside, in the warmth of their home, Penelope Ortega held her son close and smiled at her husband. knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, a family forged not by circumstance or convention, but by choice and love. 5 years later, Penelope stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Jake taught young William to ride his new pony. At 5, Will was the image of his father, not his biological father, whom he would never know, but the man who had raised him from birth with unwavering love and patience. "Not too fast, Will," Jake cautioned, holding the pony's lead rope. "Remember what I told you about the reins." "I remember, Pa," Will replied earnestly, his small hands gripping the leather straps with determination. Beside Penelope, 3-year-old Sarah Ortega clapped her hands in delight at her brother's accomplishment. Born 2 years after Will, Sarah had her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes, a perfect blend of them both. And in Penelope's arms, 6-month-old James gurgled happily, reaching out toward the activity in the yard. The youngest Ortega had arrived in the dead of winter, bringing joy to the household despite the howling blizzard that had prevented Dr. Jenkins from attending the birth. Jake had delivered his second son himself, with Penelope coaching him through the process with remarkable composure. The ranch had prospered along with the family. Jake had expanded the herd, added more land, and built the larger house he'd promised, a comfortable 6-room structure with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Penelope had indeed started a small school, teaching not only her own children, but also those from neighboring ranches who gathered 3 times a week in a converted outbuilding. Fort Benton had grown as well. Mr. Wilson had finally taken a partner in the mercantile, Penelope herself, who still kept the books and handled correspondence while managing her duties as a mother and rancher's wife. The arrangement satisfied her need for intellectual engagement while allowing her the flexibility to prioritize her family. "Mama, look, I'm riding," Will called, beaming with pride as Jake allowed the pony to walk in a small circle. "I see you, sweetheart. You're doing wonderfully." Penelope called back, her heart full at the sight of her firstborn's joy. Jake glanced up, meeting her eyes across the yard. After 5 years of marriage, that look still sent warmth coursing through her, the look of a man who adored his wife, who cherished the family they had built together. Later that evening, with the children asleep and the ranch quiet under a blanket of stars, Jake and Penelope sat together on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," Penelope replied, and meant it with her whole heart. "I was thinking today about that first moment we met, me, alone and terrified, you steadying me when I stumbled." "Best day of my life," Jake murmured, "though I didn't know it then." "Nor did I," Penelope admitted. "I couldn't see past my fears to imagine this life we would build." Jake's arm tightened around her. "I knew from the beginning that you were special, Penelope. I just hoped someday you might see something worth loving in a rough cowboy like me." Penelope turned to look at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I see everything worth loving in you, Jake Ortega, and I fall more in love with you every day." Their kiss was tender, familiar yet still thrilling after all their years together. When they parted, Jake rested his forehead against hers, a gesture that had become their own private sign of connection. Not bad for a woman who was once abandoned and alone, and a lonely cowboy who hadn't known what he was missing, Jake said with a gentle smile. "Not bad at all," Penelope agreed, nestling back against his shoulder as they rocked slowly, watching the stars shine over the home and life they had built together, a life founded on a moment of kindness that had blossomed into enduring love.